You're listening to Voices of Customer Experience. I'm your host, Mary Drumond, and on this podcast, we shine the spotlight on individuals who are making a difference in customer experience. We also proudly bring you the very best of customer experience, behavior economics, data analytics, and design. Make sure to subscribe or follow us on social for updates. Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. Discover your worth at worthix.com. Joining us from the United Kingdom is Ian Golding. Ian is a certified customer experience professional and a customer experience specialist. He's a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt and has spent over 20 years in business improvement, working hard to ensure that the businesses he works for are as customer-focused as possible. Ian has published over 500 articles on customer experience and delivered keynote speeches across the globe. He also serves on the inaugural board of the Directors of the Customer Experience Professional Association, of which he is a founding member. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, Mary. Hi, James. Lovely to be with you.
And I'm joined today by my co-host, James Conrad. Hi, James.
Hi, Mary. Great to be here.
Great. Ian is here to talk about his brand new book, Customer What? The Honest and Practical Guide to Customer Experience, a book which I just read myself. And it's great. I want to go over a few details of my impression of the book with you as well.
Now you're making me nervous.
But I did want to commend you on your book. I read that you funded this book on Kickstarter, and that's something that we discussed over email as well. So you launched this fully independent without any publishers, right?
Yes. Yeah, indeed. It's been quite a fascinating experience. For someone that's never been involved in publishing a book before. But I think the whole principle of devising the concept for the book is that I wanted it to feel like it's something that many people have contributed to, in making it happen, in sharing, stories of people that have influenced them. And so the Kickstarter thing was a way of allowing people to have a little part of it, but also helping me to make it possible.
Very cool.
Well, it was good. You're constantly referencing other people from the CX industry, people that I know that you've got a close working relationship with, Bruce Temkin, Gene Bliss, other people from the CXPA, which I know you're very active with.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm actually going to get into that, where you talk about the concepts, the core competencies of CXPA later on.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
But another thing that I thought was interesting to bring up, for those of you who haven't read Ian's book, I suggest you do. And one of the coolest things for me is that I feel like the way you wrote this book, it really had the customer of this book, who's the reader, in mind, in the layout, in the way it's diagrammed. You've got a space off to the right for adding notes, which for me is very helpful because I write all over books and I mark them up. So I did want to note that it was very, let's say, customer-centric of you.
The key word is in the title, and that's practical. I spent 17 years doing this on the inside of organizations myself. At a time when, many people didn't even know what customer experience was. It wasn't even a thing.
Right.
And, what you need when you're on the inside doing this is you need support. And support can come in many different forms, but being a customer experience professional is a lonely existence. And very often you don't know where to turn. You don't know who to ask. What I wanted to do was to create something that could potentially act as a resource to give them that support, to help them keep reminding themselves that they're not crazy. What they're doing is the right thing, but also something that is practical enough that from a text they can read it and do something with it. The most wonderful thing is that the book only went live in the beginning of May. The number of people that are already telling me that they have done stuff directly as a result of reading the book, that is just wonderful. That's what this is all about. This was never really conceived by me as a way of making money. That wasn't really the point. The point is that I do genuinely want to help people make customer experience something that's tangible. And so making this a practical text was the most important thing.
Yeah. I feel like it was designed as a playbook something that you can immediately take to the boardroom and use as a 1, 2, 3 guide.
Absolutely. And, my vision is that whenever I see one, it's essential that I see it with bits of Post-it notes sticking out of the side, scribbles all over it.
Oh my God, I'm going to send you a picture of the copy because it's exactly what it looks like.
That's what I want. Well, if that, then you're using it in exactly the right way.
Awesome. Well, the book, you divided it into fundamentals, right?
Yes.
Culture, making it happen, and sustaining.
Yes.
Is that it? Did I get it right?
Yeah, well done.
Okay, can you get into that a little bit for me? Explain the concept and how you divided these chapters.
Yeah, and what I must do before I explain this is that I always want to make sure that I give credit where credit's due, because I have a wonderful lady who works with me called Beth Richardson, who edited the book. Without her independent perspective on my ramblings, and her ability to pull those ramblings together, it wouldn't have ended up looking the way it has. And it was much of Beth's inspiration, really, that took much of my ideas and turned them into the structure that we see. And, what the two of us determined is that, for someone who has a practical desire, a genuine desire to want to help their organization become sustainably customer-centric, then there are a number of things that they've got to work out. And they're not necessarily sequential, because customer experience isn't a black and white art. But in a book, it's, I think, vital to start with the fundamentals, start with understanding, if we're talking customer experience in the first place, is the organization we're working with even ready for this? And I've been sharing with people the principle of customer experience readiness for the last 6.5 years, as I've operated as an independent specialist. And, when I talk about readiness in its simplest form, it's so important for a practitioner to have a sense of understanding. Do people even acknowledge the need for customer experience in the first place? Because if
or
you
even
believe
more
in
basic than that, do they agree on what customer experience is?
Exactly. Because the challenge is that many people who read this book will believe in customer experience, so deeply that it is almost part of them. The danger is that because we believe in it so much, we just want to charge ahead with our heads down, dragging people with us. But it's really important to realize that, despite the fact that customer experience has been talked about for, the last 15, 20 years, the confusion, the lack of understanding is rife. And so we've got to start with giving people an understanding of what exactly it is, how they feel about it today, what we need to do to change their understanding. And, the first stage of readiness I call the acknowledge phase. But this is not very politically correct, but I will always describe it as the alcoholic phase. Because the biggest challenge we've got as a community is, really trying to influence people that don't even think they have a problem in the first place. And so really the fundamentals is all about getting people to understand why customer experience is important, where they are in their own journey, either as individuals or as a team, in recognizing the need to change, and then how we as professionals can exert the right levels of authority and leverage different types of authority to enable the organization to come on the journey with us. So that's where the fundamentals comes in. Then as you move into the other parts of the book, it was all about then turning that fundamental understanding into practical application. So, creating a cultural environment where people are able to think and act in the interests of customers. Understanding how to turn a visualization of the interactions customers have with you into something that is embedded as a continuous cycle of activity to always enable you to meet and exceed the needs and expectations of customers. And then most importantly, to creating an environment that ensures that you are enabling the long-term focus on customer experience. And, that last chapter, the bit about sustaining, the sad reality is that is where many organizations are struggling more than anything else. Sustaining their focus on customer experience is really, really tough. And so, ultimately there's something for everyone here. Everyone will be at a different stage of evolution, but there is at least one thing that anyone who reads this, I am pretty sure, will take away and want to do something with.
Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. If you're interested in customer experience, behavior economics, or data science, follow Worthix on social media or subscribe to our blog for the best content on the web.
It's really interesting. I love the practicality, Ian, of laying this out for individuals to try to take action, because I think we share the same beliefs that there's a need to do something here, and I agree. I think CX folks feel a little bit challenged when they're trying to move the agenda forward, and they believe so strongly, as we all do, that this is really important.
Yes.
And could you talk a little bit about leadership and how you've been on the inside for many years, how to get leaders on board and sort of buy into this agenda and make the commitment to really transform or evolve an organization to focus on customer experience?
It's a great question, a really great question, because many people will say to me, is the only way to achieve a successful focus on CX to have the CEO on board. It would be churlish of me to say that you don't need the CEO. In an ideal state, my man crush, who is Jeff Bezos, every organization would have a Jeff Bezos equivalent, someone who believes in doing the right thing for the customer so intently that is the nature of the way the organization works.
Right.
The thing about leadership is that it's very, very important as a customer experience professional that we understand and are able to empathize with where leaders are in the first place. It's very easy for a customer experience practitioner to look at a business leader and to draw the conclusion that they are stupid, ignorant, arrogant, or a combination of all of those things. Because all they seem to want to do is focus on shareholder return. What we've got to recognize is that most CEOs, most members of the C-suite, are on that C-suite with a demand from shareholders to deliver double-digit growth. And,
Correct.
The shareholder is banging them over the head either daily or weekly or monthly, demanding those numbers go in the right direction. Now, as a CX professional, it is absolutely critical that we empathize with that. Because if we're going to storm into the boardroom and tell these guys, do you know what? The best way to make money is to put the customer first. Stop focus. Quite frankly, it is straight away demonstrating our lack of understanding of what they are going through. What we need them to understand is that we completely get the point that the organization needs to deliver a financial return. Most commercial organizations aren't charities. It is vitally important that they need to make money. But what we need to allow them to understand is that if we are able to create an environment of balance, as I call it, where there is as much an understanding of what the customer wants as there is an understanding of what the business wants, then we will be better able to connect two very important things: the purpose of the organization and the customer experience. Because what anyone that's leading an organization needs to understand is that if you only focus on what the business wants, revenue, profit, growth, EBITDA, cost reduction, whilst those things are important, if you only focus on those things, it creates what I call a misconnection between what the business wants and what the customer actually experiences. What they need to have an understanding of is that whilst it's important to focus on those business outcomes, it is as important to understand what the customer outcome is by having a customer experience strategy. And that customer experience strategy is actually very, very simple in theoretical principle. It is all about having clarity as to what does the organization want the customer experience to be. It sounds so simplistic, but it is so simplistic. What is it that we want the experience to be based on our understanding of who the customer is, what their needs and expectations are? What do we want it to be? And then it is all about educating the C-suite to understand what skills and capabilities do they need in the organization to then ensure that those two things balance effectively. And it is the lack of skill and capability, the lack of competency that many organizations are falling down on. Not because they don't have very good people, but because business leaders don't realize that customer experience has become a science. And in the book, I talk about it as a science because
I have that right here.
That's right. They need to understand what makes the science of it. I wrote an article recently called The Accidental Customer Experience. Too many organizations are doing customer experience by accident. What this book hopefully will help people understand is, and especially business leaders, is how to turn it into something that is intentional. And for it to be intentional, it's not about a business leader doing it themselves, but it's about them knowing that, do my people know how to do these things? Do they have these capabilities? And then it's about bringing the right capability in my opinion, educating and arming people within the organization with the knowledge that then will enable them to apply the science effectively. It's a long-winded answer to your question, but does that give you an insight, James?
Absolutely. It's super interesting. And I'm fascinated also with, there's a disconnect. Well, there's several disconnects, but one of them, you've seen the Gartner study, right? 89%
Yes.
of senior executives believe that we're battling now in a customer experience economy. So that's sort of, everybody believes that. But then there was a Capgemini follow-up that talked about how many companies believe they're actually delivering against that sort of mission. And it's about 30% or 33%. So I always think, what's the disconnect? If senior executives believe this is important, yes, they have these financial metrics and shareholders that they have to match, but they believe that a way of competing in their category is to deliver this exceptional customer experience. What's happening, Ian, that there's a disconnect there between that understanding and then actually investing in or committing to really making things happen?
So there's a couple of things. Firstly, it is unfortunately based on the things I'm seeing around the world, the lack of ability for organizations to think long term and to sustain their focus long term. Customer experience is a long term business strategy, but when you interrogate many corporate organizations and ask them about the stability of the organization, many of them will have a revolving door at the C-suite with leadership changing on a frequent basis. The strategy as a result changes every 5 minutes. You just have to ask people, when was the last time your organization restructured? And, it's astonishing how many companies have an annual restructure.
Yeah.
And it basically means that they whilst they're talking about customer experience, if they cannot commit to it in the long term, it will never become a sustainable reality. I actually call it the customer experience hokey cokey.
Wow.
Because, many organizations, they put one leg in and then they change the strategy, the leg comes out again. And then someone says, well, why aren't we doing this stuff? And so they put the leg back in again.
That's a good one.
This is why 15, 20 years down the line, as consumers, we are still having so many random experiences because it's almost impossible to think of a legacy organization that has been able to genuinely transform itself. And then it connects back again, additionally to what I said about, the reality of the C-suite being so obsessed with the financials. And I think an area of focus for the CX profession going forward is something that hasn't happened, is that we are spending all of our time trying to influence the C-suite, but a stakeholder group that I think has not been ignored, but I think has maybe been missed, is the community of shareholders. I think that what needs to happen is more engagement with shareholders, whether it be family-owned businesses. Well, for them to realize that if they want a return on their investment, the best way that they're going to get that return is long-term focus.
But do you think there's any way of actually solving that, Ian? Because I mean, like, at least here in the US, corporations, enterprise, especially publicly traded companies, they do like quarterly accounting and they've got their audits and that's not going to change anytime soon.
No, I know. And this is why it's so difficult because, yes, you can evangelize, but I suppose if you take it from a grassroots level, if you're speaking to a group of frontline employees, you'll get a lot of nodding heads when you're talking about this stuff. The higher up the organization goes, the less heads keep nodding, and then you get to the C-suite and, you might be lucky if you've got one head nodding. And I don't know who came up with the quote, but someone came up with a quote a few years ago that the further away you get from the customer, the more money you get paid, which I think is quite an interesting reality. But I think even if it is evangelizing, shareholders who are in this for the short term, they will realize that I don't care about customer experience. I just want short-term gain. But what they need to understand is that the days of short-term return are getting to a point where they're over. And what we need to keep reminding them of are the stories like Toys R Us, of, organizations that the reason Toys R Us failed is because they failed to respond to market changes 10 years ago. Not because of what happened this year.
Yes.
It's because they ignored it 10 years ago because their shareholders were demanding a return. So these shareholders need to make a decision. Do they want short-term return, knowing that it's likely the organization they're getting the return from could cease to exist next month? Or do they want long-term return, over a number of years? I just don't think that conversation has been had with the shareholder community.
And do you think that, not considering a company that's got that musical chairs thing going on in the C-suite, which is like major turnover on a constant basis, but when you get companies where the founder is truly customer-centric, you brought up Jeff Bezos,
Yes.
That's a good example. And lots of times we see companies that are actually doing, customer experience right, and we use them, we hold them to a certain standard of best practices, but it always comes from the founder and the founder mentality.
That's right.
Is it possible to do this and create this kind of evangelization of CX in companies that don't have this strong founder?
It's the $1 million question. I think it is, but it's exceedingly rare. And so again, in the book, I write about the UK CEO of Pizza Hut, a guy called Jens Hofmer. He is a brilliant example of someone who he is acting in a Jeff Bezos way, but not as a founder, as someone who was brought in. But it's exceedingly rare. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it very rare? I think, that if I ask people to name 10 truly transformational business leaders, they struggle. And this is globally.
Right. We'll come up with the same one. Sir Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos.
Richard Branson, Jack Welch, maybe, but they're so small in number that, do we have to be completely honest with ourselves and say that transformational leadership is rare? It's a very rare thing, and people having the courage of their convictions to do the right thing as opposed to doing what they're told, that this is not common for us to see. And I've just had a very interesting conversation with a fascinating sociologist in the US about, is this really about the human experience rather than customer experience? There are more factors that come into this. But coming back to the question, is it possible? Yes, but very, very rare to see. Because if it's going to happen, members of the C-suite need to be apolitical, and they need to be working towards the common good of the organization rather than their own personal gain.
Is this like a chicken and an eggs thing? Do we have to go back to business schools and start, teaching people all the way back?
You're reading my mind, because what I was going to say is that we're talking here about transforming the minds of people who are already running businesses. But I think the biggest opportunity is actually to start focusing on the world of academia and educating the next evolution of business leader. We need people coming out of business schools thinking, why on earth have these idiots been running companies like this? Being very rude, but why on earth are they doing this? Why are they not working together? Why are they all working in? That's what we need, and I don't think we're there yet by any stretch of the imagination. I think too many business schools are still teaching traditional marketing concepts, and but I think that it is really, really important for us to not forget the shareholder community, and B, not forget the next generation of business leader. They're the ones, I think, who can truly start to transform the way organizations work.
If you want to understand more about the science behind customer decisions, follow our blog at blog.worthix.com or find Worthix on your favorite social media. Getting your CX project off the ground? Start with the right foot by downloading our CX guides, ebooks, and playbooks on worthix.com today.
In season 2, as we've been talking to different speakers, and I wonder also, Ian, so there's a couple things. One, we're saying that there's a recognition that CX that matters. It changes as we get further away from the customer. To your point, we're saying also that it's not a short-term fix. This is something that takes years to transform. Yes. But we have this shareholder sort of need and desire to show short-term gain. So these things are in conflict, right? And these different tensions. I wonder, Ian, in your experience, is there sort of a transitional step before we get the next generation up to speed to fix the mess, where we can start to show there's a way of showing short-term improvements in CX along the way that start to show not transformational things necessarily, but ways of showing some improvement in the short term to start to get buy-in. And it almost feels a little bit like marketing's challenge, maybe if we go back 15, 20 years, when CMOs were under pressure to prove that marketing and advertising actually mattered, right? And there was sort of a period where it felt like there was a lot of pressure, and then digital came along, and I think that kind of went away a little bit.
Yeah.
So I wonder what your thoughts around that, and is there sort of this interim step or some short-term things that can be done?
Yes, I think there is. I think, can the CX community up its game in demonstrating the true reality of ROI in customer experience? Definitely. But I think one of the things that we, again, as a global community, that we spend a lot of time doing is seeing and hearing customer experience professionals, believers, evangelists talking about the importance of customer experience. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'm one of them, it's a given. If someone asks me to talk about customer experience, of course they know I'm going to talk about the wonderful power of it. What I think the interim step is that we need to really up the intensity of hearing business leaders talking about customer experience, talking about the difference it's made, talking about why they decided to go down this path of putting customer centricity at the heart of their business strategy. Not the CX professionals, but the business leaders. And to give you an example, I will often talk about, and this is not a company I've ever worked with, but I often talk about a company in the UK who are in the energy industry. And in fact, it's not doing them a disfavor. It is one of the most dull industries you'll imagine, because it's a company called Northern Gas Networks, who dig holes in the ground to put pipes to connect gas into businesses and homes. That's what they do. It's a B2B organization. It's essentially a lot of people digging holes in the ground. They have won so many customer experience awards in the last 5 years. It's remarkable. And when I first met their CEO, I said to him, why? you dig holes in the ground. Why on earth is customer experience important to you? And he said, well, if I'm being completely honest, Ian, it's because I wanted to run a sensible business and a successful business. And, to run a successful business, you've got to do the right thing for your customer and your people. And he's a very, very humble guy, very down-to-earth guy. And, what was fascinating is that I convinced him to speak at a CXPA event a couple of years ago. And people had their jaws open, because what he demonstrated is that, if you can hear someone like him talking about this, that what they were all thinking is, I need him to speak to my CEO. I need him to, how do I get my boss to listen to him? And so I think this interim step is that there are examples of truly customer-centric leaders who do have the courage to make this happen. The world needs to hear from them. And I don't think we're hearing that enough.
That's a great point.
Ian, I have a question for you. I know that you've been doing this, you said 17 years, right?
17 years as an employee on the inside, 6.5 years as a consultant on the outside. So almost 25 years.
So 25 years. Last season, we spoke to Jean Bliss. She's been at this for a really long time as well.
Yes.
And we recently had a wonderful conversation with Professor Dr. Phil Klaus, who's based in Monaco.
Yes.
And he's brilliant as well. And I sense that people that have been doing this for a long time and that have dedicated their lives to customer experience can't help but feel anxious about the way things are going, because it seems like, to a certain sense, CXers are having a really hard time proving the worth to the C-suite. And I know that Jean Bliss, in her most recent book, Would You Do That to Your Mother?, she made a point of putting a lot of business examples in there of companies that successfully did CX and how that actually translated into growth for companies. How do you feel? And, Dr. Klaus, he was almost desperate. He said, I don't want to see happening to CX the same thing that happened to CRM a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Which ultimately it just became software, right? How do you feel?
Yeah, the way I would answer that is that I'm not in the desperation stakes yet, but my concern is they're twofold, really. My first concern is that because customer experience has become, very popular for people to talk about and discuss, my biggest concern is that it is being negatively affected by people who are trying to make money out of customer experience. And my concern is that if you try to make money out of customer experience, you try to sell customer experience, it is missing the point. And actually, it is making it far more difficult for those of us who are genuinely trying to do the right thing to convince people of that. The second part of it is that my concern is that we are essentially trying to change the nature of the way businesses think. But the way businesses have always thought for over 100 years, and we are very often trying to do that, not from Gene's position. Gene is very unusual for being someone who sat on the C-suite, but most of us are 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 levels below the CEO. Right. So the majority of the CX practitioner community is so far away from the decision maker that the reason that they're finding it difficult is because they are challenged in influencing the decision makers to see its true value. And so it becomes even more important, I would argue, in that situation for the Genes, the Klauses, the Bruces, to keep doing what we're doing. In fact, I would say our passion, our knowledge, our experience is needed now more than ever. Because what we need to convince the world is that what we do is a real thing. And again, coming back to the title of the book being Customer What, the fact that people still don't see what I do as a real thing demonstrates just how far we have to go. But what I would reassure the community of is that the CXPA was only founded in 2011. The professional qualification was only launched in April 2014. You know, in real terms, we're still brand new at doing this. But what we've got to keep reminding ourselves is that the acronym CX has now been adopted globally. Now, that wouldn't have happened without the CXPA,
Sure.
without Gene and Bruce bringing this community together. The fact that everyone's talking about it, you know, none of this would have happened without Klaus doing what he does, without me talking about what we do. The fact that there are so many people who will see CX as their profession, as their vocation, this is a huge advancement that we are trying to unravel over 150 years of commercial interaction with customers. This is going to take a long time. And so it's not desperation, I think, but it is almost a desire to continue upping the ante. You know, I meet people on a weekly basis who have done amazing things in the world of customer experience, but no one knows. You know, and it's why for me, customer experience as a community it's so important that we keep collaborating. You know, you guys doing what you're doing with these wonderful podcasts, it's so important. We need to keep giving people the belief, the confidence, the reassurance that we're doing the right thing here. You know, every organization on earth has had a customer experience the day it was created. You know, this is something that's always been there. It's only now that they're consciously aware of it. And so it is ever more important that we keep convincing people that, you know, you can give up, but if you give up, I guarantee you within a period of time, you're going to start again, because this is never going to go away. It's always been there. It will never go away. And right now, the greatest advantage we have as a community is not to revel in the failure of businesses and industries, but is to keep using those as the demonstration of these are the consequences of not doing what we're talking about. Do you want to be the next Toys R Us? Do you want to be the next Pan Am? You know, because this is the tip of the iceberg. The retail industry in the UK is in a complete disastrous state. But most of these organisations have waited too long. You know, who wants to be the next industry? Or do you want to be the ones that actually are going to start listening to the amazing breadth of experience that the Genes and the Klauses have in this world? Don't see them as they're just more big consultancies trying to make money out of you. These are people who can genuinely help you. And if you want to, and again, it's why that last chapter of the book is probably the most important, because it's sustaining the focus on this that will really make the difference.
Ian, I'm so glad that our industry has people like you and people like Gene and people like Phil Klaus who will rally and bring us together and sometimes remind us of what's actually important.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to thank you for coming on today and sharing your message and your mission. How can our listeners engage with you, speak to you directly, approach you on this subject if they want to?
Well, anyone is perfectly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am a prolific blogger on the subject, so I will publish stuff every week. So they are most welcome to follow my blog, which they can find on my website at ijgolding.com. And, you know, obviously I'd be delighted if anyone is interested enough to invest in a copy of my book. They can get the book on Amazon. But if for whatever reason they are struggling with Amazon, then they can email me directly and I will sort out the distribution of the book directly. But you know, anyone is welcome to contact me with anything, a question, a concern, or even if they just want to voice their vehement disagreement with my perspective on all of it.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, guys. Lovely to talk to you both.
James, thank you once again for being on. Always a pleasure. Always look forward to your insight.
My pleasure.
And we'll wrap this up and see you all next time. Thank you for listening to Voices of Customer Experience. If you'd like to hear more or get a full podcast summary, visit the episode details page or go to blog.worthix.com/podcasts. This episode of Voices of Customer Experience was hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, co-hosted by James Conrad, and edited by Nick Gomez. Blog copy and summary by Emma Waldron.